Well, the East African Communities Elections Observer Commission declared the Kenyan elections on Tuesday calm and peaceful, and also called for a peaceful transfer of power. While the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is set to elect a new president today, a rigging allegation has been raised by the Secretary General of Kenya's governing party. For more on this, we're joined by Executive Director for Amnesty International in Kenya, Irungu Houghton. Irungu, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us this morning. If you could perhaps just take us through the general atmosphere in Kenya today as the vote tallying continues.
Well, it's extremely tense here in Kenya at the, for I think 3 reasons. One is that the tallying process or the verification of results have been showing margins of between 300,000 and 600,000, which in an election in which 16 million people voted is an extremely short margin between Raila Odinga and William Ruto. The second reason is the tension at the National Tallying Center has become palpable with claims and counterclaims of rigging that took place, particularly over last night or so. And I'm sure the authorities are getting to the bottom of it, but it has left Kenyans very concerned about this process. And the third one is that it was Tuesday. We all went to the polls. We went fairly peacefully to the polls, and we all voted as much as the people who turned out. But it's now Sunday, and we still don't have a result for the presidential elections. But what I guess some good news is that we've seen a unprecedented number of women elected as gubernatorial candidates, and that's very exciting. 7 women will govern the 7 out of the 47 counties across the country. We've also seen a large number of members of the National Assembly elected. So there are some, glimmers of hope even at a moment like this when it is so tense.
That female representation is certainly good news, Irungu, but we know that the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has about 7 days, really, to, declare an outright winner from these general elections. So we know that the IABC is under immense pressure. Just talk to us about the slow turnover with the vote tallying, the confusion that that's obviously creating, I'd imagine, amongst the Kenyans who have taken part in these elections, but also just concerns around how the electoral officials are actually handling these reactions.
Yes, well, Kenya has a digitally transmitted election in the sense that we use digital kits essentially to transmit the results, and the Electoral Commission is not prepared I think as per law to announce the final results until they have cross-checked against the manual 34A forms, and these are the critical documents that essentially matter in an election like this. During the nullification of the previous 2017 elections, the Supreme Court made it very clear that the most important documents were the 34A forms, and these are the forms that are signed by the electoral officials, by the party agents and observers at the polling stations. So what's taken so long essentially is to have all these documents essentially cross-checked by party agents, by observers, by the Electoral Commission staff at the National Tallying Center before they can give a final verdict. And it has gone much longer than they had initially announced. The initial thinking was that within 2 days we would have the result. That would have been unprecedented. But it looks like we are heading really for the very last day. Tomorrow is the deadline that the Electoral Commission has for announcing the presidential results.
Clearly, there are a lot of learning curves here, both for the IEBC and Kenyans who took part in these elections. Just talk to us about what happens if the Commission does, in fact, miss that deadline. What sort of constitutional measures are in place to deal with an eventuality like that?
Well, actually, in that context, we would go into a bit of a free fall because I think it is not envisaged that there would be an extension. But I'm assuming that they would have to be a conversation with the political parties, an agreement reached. But let's hope we don't get to that. I think the other lessons that are critical for us is really that, we saw a much lower turnout in the elections than we had expected. We had expected 22.1 million people to turn out and vote. and actually only 16 million voted, which means that the presidential candidate that will be announced will probably be announced with a mandate of about 30% of the electorate, which, if you look at it a bit more critically, in terms of all those Kenyans, 4 million Kenyans that didn't register to vote in the first place, those that have voted for the opponent, it means that there's probably about 17 million out of 47 million Kenyans, adult Kenyans, that the incoming president will have to win over in the next 5 years or so. So I think there are a lot of lessons in terms of how we prepare for elections, what level of investment we make in civic education to ensure that the electorate is not swayed by these large handouts that we saw during the mass rallies prior to the elections, which ultimately did not produce the kind of numbers that we were expecting in the elections. We had expected between 85% and 90% turnout, according to the exit polls, prior to the elections, but we've actually seen about 65%.
Yeah. You know, in an earlier conversation, Irungu, that I had with Kenyan journalist Patrick Gatara, we talked about the issue of voter apathy, particularly amongst the youth. He seemed to focus much of his commentary on the fact that Raila Odinga and William Ruto are two leaders in Kenyan politics who are seemingly being recycled, and that's really not inspiring a lot of sort of civic engagement from the younger generations. Just talk to us a little bit about that, whether or not you agree with that sentiment, or if you think there are other reasons that are pointing towards the voter apathy that we've seen in this year's elections.
I mean, the argument that voters or other potential voters didn't see candidates that resonated with them was one of the most, I guess, prevailing comments. I mean, the other one, I think, is that, you know, neglecting citizens for 4 to 5 years in terms of their understanding of public policy, in terms of their understanding of budgets, in terms of their responsibility to participate in determining some of the big budgetary and policy issues in the country, that, you know, neglecting people for 5 years and then expecting them to walk into a ballot box, or rather into a polling station to vote at a ballot box, is probably too ambitious. I think what we have to see is a consistent engagement and opportunities to
Irungu.
issue.
All right. Oh, unfortunately, we lost that audio for that final bit of response, but I do want to touch on some of the sort of success stories, because we have raised our concerns, and one of those being the fact that you know, the East African Community Election Observer Mission has determined, at least, that these elections were conducted in a calm and in a peaceful manner. That has to be, you know, touched on as a success point, as a success story for Kenya. Perhaps if you could just give us your insights around the last 15 years or so, where Kenya has had to sort of come out of a historical context of post-electoral violence and reinvent its democratic processes and electoral processes so that it's able to hold calm and peaceful elections.
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, obviously many Kenyans and, of course, the international community remember the disastrous 2007-2008 elections. And we've seen a lot of reforms since then. We've seen a new constitution. We've seen clarity around election guidelines and you know, the conduct of elections. But I think what's been really critical over this period has been essentially a number of, you know, I guess, missed opportunities, particularly over the last 5 years. We saw an electoral commission essentially under-resourced for much of the 5 years. We saw periods when there were no commissioners. We've seen last-minute changes to the Election Act and to the Campaigning Finance Act. And in many ways, that has confused the legal framework and the management framework for the elections. But I think, you know, the bigger issue really is whether we're going to be able to generate the kind of, I guess, citizenship engagement that will essentially build up to a much better turnout next elections. And secondly, also, you know, raise the level of confidence and public trust in public institutions at a critical moment like this. I mean, I think the tension we're seeing in Bomas at the moment is really unfortunate, and we just hope that that tension does not spiral across the rest of the country.
All right. Well, Irungu, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us on this morning's program. That was Executive Director in Kenya for Amnesty International, Irungu Houghton, just taking us through the latest of the vote tallying that's taking place in Kenya.